Hello, welcome to Garibaldi Red Extra Time, our new Wednesday show, and Stan's like to be joined by writer and broadcaster John Brewin, who you might well know from Guardian Football Weekly, as well as his excellent written work. He's going to tell us about his Forest memories and what he makes of the team today. John, good to have you with us. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, it's very good of you to join us. I'm sure people know your work, so good of you to be with us. We were saying before we started recording a little bit around Forest and your memories of them. So without going over them completely again, you were kind of saying we're of the same sort of generation where Brian Clough was very much a legendary manager, but maybe he wasn't, his stock wasn't at an all-time high when you grew up around football.
Yeah, I wasn't there for the truly golden years at Forest or Derby before that, but if I'm allowed to mention that.
But you are now in League One.
Yeah, okay. But so Brian Clough was this guy that you'd see on the TV who this unbelievable personality, this character, and the club seemed to be run as it was, top to bottom, by this guy who seemed quite angry quite a lot of the time and would, tell off the commentators. And his football team played a very neat style of football, obviously personified by his son, Nigel. But then you had the likes of Stuart Pearce, and then there was, obviously Roy Keane appeared. And, I remember that game, Roy Keane's giving his debut at Anfield, wasn't he? And
yes.
It just looked brilliant from the start. And I grew up a Manchester United fan, and Cloughy always beat United, it felt. And one game in particular, Easter Monday '92, they turned up and basically stopped United winning the league by winning that game. And if I'm correct, that's revenge for the League Cup final that year, which was Brian McLeod winner. And so Forest were one of those teams that were troublesome, were always there. And then obviously the decline of the Clough, you know all about that, followed. And then there was the Frank Clark era, which had a great team, didn't they? The Collymore and then beyond that, my view of Forest was like, almost permanent crisis club, of which there are several of that 90s Premier League clubs that just suddenly at the turn of the millennium just fell away. And I suppose, ITV Digital and all these things just fed into this crisis. And, once the Pierre Van Hooijdonk crisis happened, it was just one after another. And you had David Platt and all this stuff, and multiple playoff disasters. And within the press corps, there are a lot of Forest fans. And a lot of them are pretty down in the mouth about how Forest, would draw failure from what seemed guaranteed success. But I have to say, these days it's good to have them back, and I've enjoyed visiting the City Ground when I have done. It is rather preserved in the aspect of when they used to be good, when Brian was still around. But that's good, because there's too many grounds now which are identical, too modern, though. If you're in the press facilities, you don't necessarily want to drip on your laptop, which I think did happen when I was at the City Ground. So, but yeah, it's so yeah, Forest. They're not an establishment club, but they're a club with so much for someone of my age. They were just ever present. Obviously, Brian Clough, but yeah, that long journey to come back. I thought it would never happen. I mean, funny enough, my dad is a Sheffield Wednesday fan, a club that plays in a similar category. Again, good in the early 90s, and they're never coming back. And so for Forest to actually get over that and be back in the Premier League, I think is quite an achievement. And the credit goes, as I'm sure most Forest fans see, to Steve Cooper. They have a gem of a manager, I think.
We'll come on to him. He's on my topic list. I mean, just in general, you mentioned Sheffield Wednesday. They're one of those clubs that people say, if you're putting your ideal
exactly
Premier League together, it would have Sheffield Wednesday in, it would have Leeds in, and I suppose for you, would Forest be in it then, even if they've been?
Yeah, absolutely, no question. Yeah, and those are the. Yeah, there is that again. There must be a league table from say 94, 95 that everyone thinks that is how the Premier League should be. And that would include Blackburn, funnily enough. But would people, but Blackburn were, a very big club. It's just how the shifting sands of football. And I suppose, actually, if you think about Forest, they have been victims of that because provinces or of England, English football have had, apart from Manchester, have had problems because London is suddenly this big magnet for players and money. Liverpool just about managed to get themselves, keep their head above that, into that elite category. And then for other clubs to prosper, well, we have to have investment by nation states and the rest of it. And then we're getting into all types of dodgy territory, aren't we?
So what have you made of Forest as a member of the National Press Pack since promotion? Obviously, they seem like this kind of curiosity in a way, with so many transfers, so much said and written about them. Internally, we were like, well, they had to make a lot of transfers because they came up with literally 5 players.
Yes.
But it did go a bit crazy, but I don't think the national media expects it to go as bad as it did, and maybe we didn't as well. But, they are a curious beast in a way, aren't they, since getting promoted? So what's your take on them?
Yeah, I mean, again, they came up with more chaos, really. I mean, the owner, interesting character, it adds to the gaiety of nations, him being around, doesn't it? And just, in those early weeks when players were coming in and in and in on a level that only Chelsea have managed to emulate, really, in terms of recruitment. There were so many strange mixed messages coming out of the club. There appeared to be a lack of unity. Various briefings coming from parts of the club, sporting directors coming and going. And then there was this idea, wasn't there, that Cooper himself would go. And I remember there was this point, it's like, well, Cooper's going to get fired next week. And instead, as I recall it, he was given a new contract. And from that point, I do think, not exactly the most stable club in the world, Forest have affected that, or given off that idea that someone there might know what they're doing. And look at last season, obviously, as a player you sold, but in players like Brennan Johnson, they were too good to go down, really, compared to those that fell down. Your Leeds and Leicester's just fell off a cliff, really, whereas Forest got stronger. Again, credit to Steve Cooper, who I do think I would suggest if anything went awry there, that might be a big problem for Nottingham Forest.
Let's talk about Cooper then, 'cause it's interesting. It's always different. In the grounds, everyone's 100% behind him, but online, on Twitter and other places that talk about Forest, there's a bit of an increasing, not maybe tied against him or question marks over him, which I still don't buy. I think it is a results business and it carries on.
Absolutely,
against him. But as we sit here right now, I think they've had a mad 15 minutes against Luton, and they were pretty average against Liverpool. But otherwise, they've not been a million miles away. But there are question marks against Cooper for the first time for some. I mean, that surprises you a lot, I take it then.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? That clubs, those that don't follow the club closely, aren't completely wide in. So, as popular a club as Forest might be amongst certain journalists, they're not the focus of a national that comes out of London. That's so. I always thought that there are certain managers that got away with going on long runs of defeats or not winning matches. Eddie Howe used to do that all the time at Bournemouth, and then suddenly you'd think they haven't won for 3 months, and then would win, and then isn't Eddie Howe one of the best managers in football? That's, and I think there is something about that with Steve Cooper. I don't think any, I mean, the performance against Liverpool, which were coming off, was not fantastic. It was a pretty one-sided. The first goal, though, was it the first goal? Was an act of the defender bringing it out of play.
Murillo running into the field,
decided he was Clodoaldo in the 1970 World Cup final and getting robbed, and they score. So that's an individual mistake, but it felt like there wasn't a way back into that game. Now, obviously, Liverpool, I think, are likely to be up there with Arsenal as challengers to Manchester City. So no disgrace in that. But when you asked me to come on, I looked at Forest's league position, and I was quite surprised actually, because again they're not. It doesn't feel to me like there's any great decline set in there. But injuries and a few mediocre performances, and that's the type of position you can find yourself in. I mean, maybe we'll go on to talk about this, but I've seen quite a lot of the other clubs towards the bottom of the league, and I don't think they have too much to worry about, or shouldn't, unless things go pretty badly.
Yeah. I mean, they've got a few injuries at the wrong time. They had no striker yesterday. So,
yeah, I mean, Alanga, who I think is a talented player, though, at Manchester United, suffered from having a patronage of Ralph Rangnick, which is, a bit of a kiss of death, unfortunately. He's a good player. He's really hardworking, but yeah, he's no line leader. And as many, this is the issue, isn't it? I know you have injuries, but strikers are hard to come by these days. Strikers and central defenders are difficult to come by. Everyone's a midfielder and or a winger, and they can't always play centre forward either.
But, I mean, just obviously you'll have seen more of Alanga than me, probably, even if I've seen him this season. You weren't surprised United moved him on then when they've got Garnacho and other players waiting in the wings?
Yeah, I think they had a glut of wingers. And Manchester United, like so many other clubs, is a bit of a sell-to-buy club now because of the finances there. I mean, I didn't sell him for two. How much did you pay for him?
15 million.
Okay, well, that's a reasonable price for a player of that level. I would say that's market value. There's improvement to come from him, I'd say. And I did think at United he was one of those that did. I think the good thing about him is that he will follow a manager's instructions properly. He's a well-coached player, responds well to coaching, and that's to Steve Cooper's benefit. And I think Rangnick saw that. The problem that Rangnick had at United is that was just about the only player that would listen to him because I mean, you've seen how Manchester United are. They don't listen to the guy at the moment either. So yeah.
No, I mean, I'm going off on a tangent, but Bruno Fernandes drives me mad as a captain in a losing effort. He's absolutely toxic. I don't know. He's the last player.
I'm not on the Bruno Fernandes fun bus. No, I don't really. I think a club like United, there is too much of a hero complex in certain players. Now, I grew up in the late 80s. There was this Brian Robson thing, and then Cantona came and actually delivered this stuff, and Roy Keane and other. And I think fans look for this. And Steven Gerrard was a player like that. Though Steven Gerrard is a much, much better player than Bruno Fernandes, I should say. But this idea of this guy is going to score from this and take it on and on, it doesn't work. You need to have someone like that needs tactical discipline, and then you compare that to, say, Bernardo Silva, his compatriot, who can play in any position, will do what a manager says, and that's the big difference in football these days, isn't it? Is that you look at those clubs at the top of the division. Okay, they've got the best players, but their players are ones that respond to what the manager's asking them to do, and say, so the club that everyone loves these days is Brighton these days, and that's because De Zerbi, who's a pretty fearsome character actually up close, they listen to what he says, and he has a real hold on the players and their tactics, and that is what the Premier League is about now, isn't it? It's this really, really tactical, tough. He says this pressing game. I don't know about you. It feels like in the last two seasons or so, I mean, pressing's always been about. I remember Fabio Capello, when he was England manager, screaming press at the England players, and they didn't, obviously. And Milan used to play pressing, obviously where he came from. But I was at Wolves Newcastle over the weekend, and that was just two teams pushing so hard to force a mistake from the other team to score from, and that's pretty much how I understand a lot of coaching goes on now in the Premier League.
Yeah. That was a really good game. Newcastle looked shattered by the end, I thought. But I think Forest they're a little bit behind that. They're trying to catch up with the players they've signed this season to be more front foot, be more aggressive, but they are a bit behind. Talking of United, Brighton, and the teams, does it feel like 2 leagues within a league to you, or even 3 leagues within a league to you this season again?
Yeah, I mean there's a mini league at the top that Manchester City will win, I think, in a class of their own. As good as I think a job Mikel Arteta's done at Arsenal, and as good a manager as Klopp is, I think Liverpool do have that oscillation up and down. I think they get tired. I mean, you would get tired playing for a Klopp team, wouldn't you? But they've got younger legs now. But yeah, the thing is, when I go to Premier League matches, as I do most weeks, I think the thing that really stands out for me is that each team has a real quality player. It feels like that. There is a high standard play in attack, in midfield, that 10 years ago you wouldn't have found. You could go to let's say an Everton, Birmingham, and you'd find nothing.
You find Robbie Savage as the best player in Birmingham's midfield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they'll be up against like Dennis Straculerzi or someone like that. It would be, but now, so you go to Brentford. I go to Brentford quite a lot because it's down in London, and the quality player they've got, Mbuemo, Wisa, it's really exciting playing. So a game like Wolves, Newcastle have spent a fortune on players, but Wolves have Neto, who is a fantastic player, and that is the thing, is that, and in that middle section, every team does appear to have that player. And I suppose actually that's a question of you, who's your wild card, your maestro this season? Is it Gibbs White? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's meant to be Gibbs White. He's had some criticism this season because I think he got 5 goals and 8 assists last season. He hasn't matched those numbers, but they've kind of tried to spread the workload on him a bit. They've signed Nicolas Dominguez from Bologna, who's done very well. They've got Tyro Awoniyi, who started the season on fire. Scored at Old Trafford very early on, then got injured, which is a problem. So
and Hudson-Odoi as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and again, he started really well, scored that great goal against Burnley, and then now he's injured, and it's kind of symptomatic, like watching Liverpool when they've got a front three of Salah, Jota, Darwin.
Yeah, amazing.
Even our best front three is Hudson-Odoi, Elanga, and Awoniyi probably, and Elanga and Hudson-Odoi are projects that cost 20 million between them, and we're trying to get to be where Aston Villa are, and they're spending 50 million quid on Diaby and 30 million on Bailey. And I think there's a gulf, isn't there? Teams like Villa and Brighton are the ones who look closest to bridging that gap. And I think, would you say Forest are in that clutch with Palace, Fulham, maybe Brentford, West Ham? Is it too ambitious? Are they just below that still for you?
I think maybe just a little below that, not far off, but that's clearly where the club are aspiring to, isn't it? Because again, Palace are long established in the Premier League, and with recruitment, it's difficult to get players. So, like a player like Eze is gonna be happy to go to Palace. Again, that's a London factor because players like to live in London. I mean, Olise as well. Palace are actually a team I really enjoy watching. Just because they seem to play totally off the cuff, and again, I have no idea how much Roy Hodgson has to do with this, but they do play this amazing attacking football at times, and sometimes they can be really quite poor. But yeah, Brentford are one of those teams that I think someone like Forest probably aspire to, which is, Thomas Frank is not dissimilar to Steve Cooper, but is someone I think he's changed his style of play as he's gone on, because I mean they arrived in the Premier League. I think it was that first game. Did they beat Arsenal 3-2?
Yeah,
and it was, they were like the new crazy gang, like a Wimbledon. Excuse me. And he's refined the team's play a little bit more, and you need to adapt according to. I mean, what you also need to do is that eventually the opposition are going to work out how you're going to play. So you have to vary it a little bit. And even Brighton, suddenly there was a certain point where they were smashing everybody because they have this counter play. Then eventually, Unai Emery works out that if you wait a little bit longer, then you can counter on them, and you can score 6 goals in which was at that game. Maybe Forest don't quite have that level of player yet, or that tactical sophistication, but I think that's what they need to be aspiring to. I think that bottom group. I mean, Bournemouth won at the weekend, and maybe they might go on a run. You don't know. Burnley, I have to say, Vincent Kompany. I'm not sure. I mean, I do think there's a guy with a job because of who he is. Yeah, and I think that speaks to the quality of the Championship last season, which those with a bit more expertise tell me was not fantastic last year. And I think Sheffield United probably are proof of that, even though I'm an admirer of Paul Heckingbottom just for that sort of bluff Yorkshire spirit that he puts into the team, and also the honesty with which he approaches the game and just says, come on. But this idea that they bring in Chris Wilder back or whatever and it changes, I can't see it. But yeah, but Forest have to be and should be should aspire to be better than that. And then, of course, you've got Everton as well as the other team in there. Good win against West Ham at the weekend. But then you've got points deductions and a very thin squad. And I'm not utterly convinced by Sean Dyche, a guy who was pretty heavily linked with replacing your man for a while, wasn't he?
Well, he lives in Nottingham, yeah, and he's at a lot of games, so I'm sure he would have liked the job at one point. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, a Clough graduate or whatever, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I always thought that was a bit quite interesting. That he was at a lot of the games. It was a bit like, is that necessary, really, when the man's under pressure? I don't know. Sean Dyche wouldn't like that if other, if Chris Wilder, say, sat in the stands at Everton or whatever. I don't know, but yeah.
Just going back to last season then and all the signings. I mean, hand on heart, when you were discussing it on Guardian Football Weekly, did you think this is going to blow up and be a people say Fulham of 2018 kind of spectacular failure?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, everyone did. I mean, come on. I mean, and I saw quite a bit of Fulham in that at that time, and I mean, they went through a couple of managers, didn't they? And it was, and actually, that possibly is what saved it. Is that you don't panic and you don't give all the power to these players you've brought in that haven't actually, aren't used to working with each other, and you keep the faith in the manager. And maybe those that, the various recruiters are the ones that pay the price for that. Yeah, I mean, it seemed like a crazy situation. We've seen it, as I said, at Chelsea, where it doesn't work. You can't just bring in a load of players and say, hey, there you go. You have to bring in proven quality as well at times. Now, that's according to a club's budget as well. But somehow it felt like they muddled through. And then, obviously, the home record, playing at the City Ground, was a big part of keeping them up.
Yeah, I mean, is that one of the things why you hold Cooper in high regard for keeping it together in that circumstance? Because he made a team out of a very disparate group of players that came together very quickly.
Yeah, he did, and the previous season to that, of course, as I recall, Nottingham Forest was a group of loanees and players. So if you wanted a manager to build a scratch team, Steve Cooper's probably your man. I suppose that the test of him now is whether, with that little bit more stability, I wouldn't say that Forest is the most stable club in the world. I don't think you would either, Matt.
No.
Whether he's able to maintain that, because there are so many clubs over the years that you've thought have cracked it, that have thought, hang on, we've got through the first season, you're probably going to get through the second, and then that's the problem. And I think, as I said, Brentford, I think at the start of the season began to wobble a bit, thinking that might be an issue. I think they'll be okay now. But think back, 15 years, teams like Reading, where you thought they might be around for quite a while, and then you have a few bad results, turns into a bad season, and then you don't come back. And Leeds as well isn't, Leeds again in that ideal Premier League it looked for 2 seasons that they got it right. Was it 2
Mm.
seasons or actually 1 season? I can't. But it was the pandemic always makes me.
Yeah, they got it right first season. They got wins like Anfield and Man
Yeah,
City.
yeah,
They beat, didn't
they
they, as
got it
well?
right the
It all
first
went wrong.
season, and then it fell apart because it was. Again, it's not sustainable. I don't think Bielsa's play is sustainable in any sense whatsoever over a season. Just don't tell Leeds fans that, who would still reject what was quite an obvious conclusion. But there you go.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose this is the challenge for Cooper now. It's probably the first time in his whole coaching career he's had investment in his team, and he's signed players like Sangare, who for 30 million quid, and that's the big test, I suppose. And the other thing a lot of fans see, you can probably speak to, is the shiny new object. You mentioned De Zerbi, you mentioned Emery.
Yes.
It can go that way, but it can also go Graham Potter at Chelsea, Jesse Marsh at Leeds. You bring in Dean Smith at Leicester. You bring some new manager in, it can go either way, can't it? It's just that you trust the owners to get it right in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's always this idea, isn't it, that the manager doesn't really make that much difference to a club, and that's what the stats nerds will tell you. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, it felt to me like football managers dominated then, and I still think they do in a certain sense. And I do think that why Manchester City are the best team in football, aside from all the benefits they've received from their ownership, well, it's because they've got Pep Guardiola, the best manager, the best coach. It's a fairly simple equation. Other clubs have spent more money. Manchester United, that's and they haven't got that. Management's such a it's such a difficult question. I'm a bit lost on that one, I think.
But you do rate Emery and Zerbi.
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. Yeah, I mean, I think they. Again, Emery's one of those managers. Again, a lot of it to do. Someone like Emery is a. If you're in the presence of Emery, is one of the nicest chaps you could meet. He is will answer every question, but his focus is completely on football, completely on tactics. And I do think he was a victim of replacing Arsene Wenger. I do think he was a victim. He went to Paris Saint-Germain, and he's so football focused that he can't deal with the other stuff around him. I remember seeing when he was a Sevilla manager, and obviously it was through a translator, and it was almost as impregnable. In Spanish, you could tell that the Spanish journalist was similarly left cold by this level of discourse. De Zerbi, someone like that. I mean, De Zerbi, Steve, because of the sort of, okay, if you look at Steve Cooper is not a prepossessing character, is he? He's not Mr. Charisma, and that actually is one thing he has going for him, because someone like De Zerbi is like this sort of huckster, hipster guy. He speaks. His English is not fantastic, though. He speaks enough to know when he's got a barb comment. I remember last season him digging out Leandro Trossard when he was going to leave the club. Just a pretty. There's an edge to him. I imagine Cooper can be hard off the pitch. He'd have to be, right, to make the decisions he has. But to his eternal credit, or to his credit in a public-facing manner, he's able to be Steve Cooper, nice guy. Obviously, his dad, Keith Cooper, appears to be one of the only referees that anyone has any time for. So that tells you something, I think. Like he's from a nice family and he's a nice guy. And he's what's this? I think is this his 4th season as a manager only? I think that's right.
5th. Someone said, in club management.
Which is to be where he is now is a real achievement. And obviously, we all watched the achievement he did with the younger teams for England. And I did think actually with Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi, he was trying to rely on players that he knew. There are players that he knows, and you will know as a Forest fan that even when I was reading the history of Forest as a youngster, the fact that you would take McGovern, O'Hare, you need players around you that know you. And I don't know if is that possible. I'm not sure there are many John McGoverns and John O'Hares around these days, but are they the Steve Cooper version?
Yeah, we've got Joe Worrell and Ryan Yates who have come up with the football club, and they're the captain and vice captain. Unfortunately, they're struggling to get in the team at the moment because we've had this upgrading quality, which hasn't quite yielded the results yet. But that's the other part of the challenge for them as players, is can they step up and become regulars? Because the fans especially love Yates. Worrell's a bit more divisive, but we did lack that at Anfield, I thought. A bit of bite, a bit of character, a bit of, not go through someone, but someone take a booking or something, because it was so easy for Schlobbersai, who's really good, and McAllister as well.
Fantastic player, yeah. I saw a bit. There's a bit McAllister, who is he's not a defensively minded player, is he? But I did see him sort of coming back to sweep up a Forest attack rather too easily.
Yeah. It was all a bit anemic, certainly. Right, if we pull all the strands together, then, just to finish, from what you've seen,
and I've been all over the show here.
No, it's my fault. No, I think it's not at all. But I suppose the point I was going to ask you is, you've seen a lot of Premier League football. You feel the bottom 3, bottom 4 sides, they're pretty set now, and Forest are they're above that. The question is, how far above that can they get, really? Or do you worry they could still get sucked into it and be a Leicester who sleepwalks down the table?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the grandest cliches, isn't it, in football, of like, there's always one team that could drop down. But, I mean, Sheffield United, hopeless. Burnley might change the manager. That could make a difference. Luton, a lot of spirit in them. Really enjoyed them. I was up there the other week against Tottenham. They gave it absolutely everything. Tottenham were down to 10 men and didn't have enough. I mean, Tottenham on the team, top of the league, of course. But I suppose what you can't do is think, oh, we got away with it this season because those teams weren't good enough. There is going to have to be strengthening. You're going to have to work on improving the team through the season. Like, you can't just say we got away with it, because that's possibly where teams like Leicester and Leeds go wrong, because Leeds stayed up the season before. Jesse Marsh is doing this, whoop and holler celebration, and then they go down the next year. This is the the problem with being a Premier League club and not the richest Premier League club, which is Forest's state of being, is that establishing yourself is very, very difficult. And I think they'll be okay this season, but it's that. I mean, what's next? You have to. The Cooper thing may come and go. You'd be concerned, I imagine, over who the next manager would be. I mean, what are the type of names that the Cooper deniers would mention?
Yeah, I mean, the two are Lopetegui, who did really well at Wolves. He didn't play sparkling football. It was all it was results driven. It wasn't entertainment driven.
No,
and then he walked after 6 months as well.
Well, I saw quite a bit of him at Wolves towards the end of last season, and very tactical manager. Occasionally got the tactics a bit wrong. Was a bit panicky in games where he decided to play for a draw, and then I think there was one game in particular. I think it was against Liverpool. And then he didn't get the finance that he wanted and left the club. The best thing I heard, to his credit, actually, was that he decided to leave, and until they appointed Gary O'Neill, he said, I'll stay and train the players, which I thought, you don't get that. I mean, there's honour in football that you don't often get. So who's the other name then you've heard?
I mean, I was just on Lopetegui. I do think Lopetegui is a good manager, but
me too.
His name carries a bit of a cachet. The other one's Potter, who fans would like, given his work at Brighton more so than Chelsea, which I can see. He's very good.
Well, Steve Potter and Steve Cooper sort of interchange. That's Swansea, and Potter, that's an interesting one. We barely heard of. For when did he lose his job? April now, so 6 months, 6-7 months since we've heard from him. I think he took it's got a hell of a shock at Chelsea. He used to play for Macclesfield Town, my hometown club, and he actually a similar disposition to Steve Cooper. Nice guy. I've seen him he's a very, very polite man. Brian Clough would approve. And he's very, very polite man, very gentle character. It does feel like he was chewed up and spat out a bit by Chelsea. But would he want to go to a club that buys players in the same amount of volume as Forest have? Because I think he's been a victim of that before.
Yeah, and he was come from Brighton, who was so well run. I'm not saying Forest aren't well run because the owners put a lot of money in, but Cooper's one of his strengths is managing upwards. I think with an owner who's very demanding.
Yes,
and
yeah.
Cooper, Potter did so well at Brighton, where there was a lot of time given, a lot of patience, and didn't get that at Chelsea. And I don't think he necessarily get that at Forest because no Forest managers had that. But Cooper was the first to complete a season in charge for about 15 years at least.
Well, yeah. I mean. I've forgotten about Graham Potter. That's the thing. He was one of those managers actually, who actually was quite a good self-publicist, believe it or not. Before,
oh, really? Okay.
Because when he was at Ostersunds in
in Sweden,
on the website, his phone number was written on there, and you could phone him. So a lot of journalists did. Here's Graham Potter, the ex Aston Villa, and then obviously. And then I think they played. Did they play an English club in the Europa League? Might be Arsenal.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And then didn't stay long at Swansea, but really sort of pushed himself. And then Brighton, he's and he pushed. Yeah, I mean, I think Potter would be a fine manager at Forest. Let's not bury Steve Cooper just yet. But
no,
I think that's the type of manager you should have because it's progressive. Works with players, improves players. We saw that, but I think as you intimated before, everyone's looking for the new De Zerbi, aren't they? The tactical revolutionary, which I think is Bournemouth's problem, is that they went for that in Iraola, and we'll see. I mean, I think they might get better. I think they've had more money spent on them than people realise, which So hey, maybe you might start to worry if Bournemouth start to push you up, but they're not in. Yeah,
no, and I'm fully. I mean, I spoke for ages on this podcast, backing Cooper, making the case that he's keep raising his ceiling every year he's been in management. I think he'll keep doing it if given time. Just last question before we go. Then there were other names linked last season. I was interested to get your take on them. Rafa Benitez, Steven Gerrard, and Patrick Vieira were the other three names that probably most prominently linked. I mean, is Vieira the only one amongst that bunch that you personally would say has a manager in him or not? Obviously, Rafa did, but has his ship sailed now?
I think Rafa's having problems in Spain, isn't he? Is it Celta Vigo? I think things haven't gone too well. Stephen, okay. Don't really say much more about him. He's made his decision, lucratively.
Very good.
976 fan. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Macclesfield Town might get more than that.
Yeah, they do. They do. Now there's a bar. Yeah. But yes, Vieira. No, I think there was an idea that Vieira was pretty harshly treated by Palace, but their ownership were concerned that things would slip. Roy came in, and then everything was fine. I'd be concerned about him. I think he's been in New York. He was at Nice, I think, wasn't he, for a little bit? I wouldn't. I think you've got to push towards the Potter and Lopetegui market, really, if that's what you want. But again, let's not. Steve Cooper's one of those names that, there are certain sort of Fleet Street hacks that spend their entire time searching for the next England manager. Now, I know he's a Welshman, but he's the type that would be linked with it because of his achievements and his the fact he's worked for the FA and stuff like that. Though, as good a job as Gareth Southgate has done, I wouldn't wish that job on anyone really. It's
No, we discussed this on a live show, saying that Cooper's great strength is coaching, developing players, and if you're England manager, you're only doing that for 2 days every 2 months or something.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the thing with Cooper is that he, even if he steps away from frontline management, he'll always have a job because of those qualities of coaching. I think, like he is a top pro, and of course, at Liverpool he was highly thought of there, and and that's the thing, isn't it? With you mentioned Vieira, you mentioned Gerrard, those Vincent Kompany might fall into this category. We don't know that yet, but Wayne Rooney's another one, isn't he? Big name, well, I don't know why clubs do this. I really
Yeah.
don't. When there are so many coaches and managers that coming up through the system, which we've in English football they've worked out through St George's Park, so on, to turn to those names, because they might sell a few tickets for a few weeks, but the ticket sales will go down when they start playing, like
Yeah.
Villa did under Gerrard, or it's a great. I mean, you had it, maybe with David Platt, a generation ago, and as far as I recall, he wasn't the most popular manager you ever had.
No, although his players did love him, and players I speak to about him say he was ahead of his time, and in terms of methodology, he was more from the Wenger school. You can see why he went to work with Mancini a lot, didn't he?
Yeah.
Career, so yeah, true. But it's a case to be careful what you wish for, which seems a good note to end on. So hopefully people have watched that and enjoyed it. Do give us a like and a subscribe as ever, and we shall be back tomorrow previewing the Aston Villa game in the company of some of the regulars. So John, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, I did. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks very much. Have a good few days, everyone. We shall see you soon.